Hello, Exiles. For most of you, it's been long time no see. For a few of you, you've seen me doing other things here or there on YouTube. Today, though, it's all about the patch notes. And there's 30,000 words of them. When I saw them talking about that, my first reaction was, let's read through them first and then go over them real quick. Let's get the footnotes, because you got a lot of stuff here. The league looks really cool, right? City builder simulation, you can automate parts of the game. You can actually hire people to go out and run your maps for you, which is, I mean, there's a novelty there. Hopefully it's not too gimmicky and it actually feels good. There's always the concern that this turns into a daily login campaign where you have to keep your gold up, so you could always keep your guys running maps. I hope that's not what happens. Probably not. It seems like you have to keep that going regularly while you're playing the game. So, should be fun. Looks like a decent league. It's got bosses. It's got a lot to do. It's got some interesting crafting options. Boy, do we need to talk about crafting options. You know what? I want to start with that. I do. I want to start with that. We're going to go right to this. Here we are. Many modifiers that granted physical damage taken as an element or chaos can no longer roll. I should mention alongside this, things like the armor and energy shield masteries for armor applying to chaos damage, and also percentage of your chaos damage, or a percentage of your physical damage being taken as chaos, those are gone as well. They really went after this particular stat and they hammered it. In fact, the only place I think that it's really acquirable now, I can talk, I swear, is right here. There's a new Eldritch implicit on your body armors. They don't tell us what the value is. It could be 10%, it could be 20%, it could be 30%. And if it's like 30%, that's really good, actually. That's still plenty for most things, because that's basically your damn lightning coil. Speaking of which, lightning coil still exists. I actually did not see lightning coil in here anywhere, which is a big deal, because now lightning coil is probably very, very good for a lot of builds. I think that's going to be a very desirable item this league, because that stat has gone away, and if you're a right side tree and you hate getting clapped by physical damage, your number one fix, efficiency-wise, is like gone. It's not even on Taste of Hate anymore. Complete and stand. Honestly, that one really shocked me. I almost feel like Taste of Hate moves down a rarity tier, maybe even 2. That was like a very valuable stat. Moving on, let's hop over to the builds near and dear to my heart. Detonate Dead was not touched. That does not mean the build was not touched, though. For starters, Desecrate has basically been nuked from orbit as far as the whole using specters to maintain your corpse pool is concerned, to the degree that spectral corpses, the corpses for your specters, they're now distinguished because they cannot be used for corpse detonation. They can only be used for raised specter and offerings. Oh, yeah, that's a huge amount of damage taken from the skill. But it gets worse. It actually gets a lot worse, because Desecrate itself now only scales up to level 80 corpses at level 20 gem. That's a big deal. I'm pretty sure with some universal spell and skill gem levels, you can still get it up to 86, which would be the relevant maximum regardless. But that's a lot of investment now. And it gets worse. Because they did it to Unearth too, and now Unearth only goes to 70, and this actually pissed me off quite a bit. This should probably be 76, and I'll tell you why. The difference between 70 and 80 is massive. That's tremendous. I think it's like 1/3 the life total. All of that said, this is mostly going to be a single target issue for the Kitava's Thirst corpse blasting build that I do. Generally speaking, that build is still going to fly up to maps and crush mapping super consistently, and probably be even more durable now. I'm going to be perfectly honest. It's getting more block, and we're getting some sources of max res, which was like the one thing the build needed to go to that next level. So it's going to be a little slower single target, but monster corpses haven't changed at all, and we're still blowing those up. So generally speaking, I think that build's going to be just fine. It'll still get you your Void Stones early on. It might not be the best choice for getting your Void Stones from Uber Elder and Maven, though. I'm not sure about that yet. The single target situation is legitimately a little spooky. I'd have to test it, and I'm sure I'll be able to figure out numbers and like simulate that at some point. Basically, that build guide's going to be a little delayed because I need to look into that stuff. It will be usable though. If you want to run it, go ahead. Just understand that you're probably using this as a farming build, and it will do that extremely well. It will still farm extremely well. It'll still do like not ridiculous content, like if you want to run breach stones and stuff, probably even delirium up to a certain point will be okay as well. Although the later deliriums have a pretty good damage requirement, so I'm not 1,000% on that. It's going to be a who knows situation, and I have to test it on my main, like with a simulation going, because I'm going to be honest, I don't want to play that build this league. Not because of this. I played it like 2 or 3 leagues in a row now, and I want to do something else, especially with all the new melee changes, which is where we should get to next. So the first and obvious thing about melee skills that we're all very excited about is that melee totem skills are gone. And not just gone, they've actually been like removed. I think there's a unique item now that grants Earthbreaker as a support, but that support does not exist as a gem anymore. That's the only source of melee totem gameplay, because they want to get away from the idea that something other than you is doing the damage. And I want to say that I think that's a really cool design philosophy to go for the whole archetype, because it is definitely the type of build where you're like, I want to be in there feeling like I'm doing it. That is Melee's identity now. And I think that's really, really cool, because it kind of gives a little back from the way the game has developed in such a way where you don't feel like you're in there hitting them the way you do in, say, other slower games. Like, you need to have a certain amount of range, even in your melee skills. And this kind of wins a little bit of that feeling back, I think. But that's kind of a philosophical debate. The rest of the changes are a little more complicated than that. I would even say some of them are vexing. All right, I don't like them. The banner rework, largely, I'm not the biggest fan of. War banner still looks pretty good. The other banners feel defensive, and their buffs are so circumstantial that I kind of don't love them. I think one of them gives movement speed and spell suppression, which, if you don't have 100% spell suppression, you don't have 100% spell suppression. And I know that's kind of a weird way to look at it, but that's kind of a weird spot. Like, I feel like you just want to have 100%, and having that be contingent on being near a banner all the time is going to get really tedious, or it's just not going to work. It also gives movement speed, which you're in a limited area, so I kind of see how against the boss that could be useful, but I'm not the biggest fan of that one. I could be wrong. Maybe with enough Valor is what they're calling the resource for it now. It's so much movement speed that it's amazing. War Banner actually gives you % more physical damage, which I think is fantastic. That's going to feel great. The one thing about banners that I do really like is this here, a new Defiant Stand cluster. When you have it, placing a banner with full Valor will give you 3 endurance charges and 3 frenzy charges, which has really good synergy around the whole playstyle of, I'm going to drop my banner and I'm going to do some work. And yeah, no, that's fantastic. I really like that. I also like some of the masteries. Recovering life when you place the banner is kind of nice as like an emergency heal. I think they go up to, I don't know what the actual maximum is, but I know that you can get plus 30 here. So it's going to be pretty high, and that's going to be a pretty sizable heal. Also, banners also cause enemies to take 8% increased damage. That's an importantly worded line of text, because it causing them to do it means that it is an effect of the banner itself, I think, I'm pretty sure, which means that that 8% will be scaled up with the more effect on the banner from having Valor. So that could actually end up being a pretty sizable debuff, and maybe banners will actually be pretty good, or at least I think War Banner will be pretty good. You drop it, you get endurance charges for tank, you get frenzy charges for damage, they take increased damage, you get a heal, and you go to town. Now, Rage is very interesting. There was almost a moment where I got cross-eyed wondering what was going on because of this line of text here. Many sources of Rage now generate Rage much more quickly. There is now a shared cooldown preventing you from generating Rage on hit from more than 1 hit every 0.5 seconds. I looked at that and I thought, what? They can't have a shared cooldown. But then I realized the wording on all of them has been changed and homogenized. And I think what that means is when you have Rage on hit effects together, they are not separate. They all lump together and they have the same internal cooldown. So you'll smack and you'll get all of your Rage and you'll be good to go. And the Rage cap is only 30 now, but you get 1% more attack damage per Rage. That's really good. That's 30% more damage, which is at least as good as old Rage was. But now it's easier to build up to it. And if you get enough sources of gain Rage on hit, that could be like you're spun up in 3 seconds from 0. Yeah, I'll take that. You know what? I'll take that a lot, especially considering there are still some sources that will give rage new effects, or I think there's even a few sources yet that will give you additional maximum rage. Rigwald Savagery is one of the examples here that they show. It's been nerfed, and in many places the maximum rage benefits have been removed, but they do still exist out there, and they're now much more valuable because that is another 1% more attack damage onto the base 30 for each one you get. And that's, I mean, like, that's pretty good. That's really good. And then I think Berserk was nerfed slightly to give 50% increased effective rage, which, I mean, now it's 1.5%. 30 rage is now 45% more damage. That's still very good. And I think rage in general is a lot better. The rage support gem has been nuked from orbit, though. That basically just grants you rage now and then gives you a flat attack speed buff all the time. But it's only like 19%, which feels very low. I could be wrong on this one, though, because they have removed attack speed sources in a lot of places. This is pretty typical. And I would say that should be a giant red flag. However, there is a line of text in this patch notes that makes it not a red flag. And I'm going to jump to that because I've kind of gone off. I've gone off on a tangent, but it's important to say this now. This is the line of text I'm talking about. Skills that use basic melee strike animation now have a more consistent swing speed rather than the first swing being slower than the second swing. What does that mean? It means that when you swing your attack and it does a real quick two-hitter with a really big windup on the first one, it doesn't do that anymore. No, it just consistent, which means that the first one comes out much faster. And that's always been the problem with a lot of the melee skills since the kind of Legion rework on the animations front. This is going to be a huge deal. This might actually be the most important change to melee skills, period. If you've ever played a melee skill that has one of those attack animation systems, and I think Bone Shatter specifically doesn't, you'd know how bad it feels to use that. Now that it's gone, all of those skills come alive, and attack speed is significantly less necessary for the skills to feel good. And that's why the rest of this is kind of okay, like the attack speed thing. Jumping back to the rage rework here, the new rage gem, just granting like 19% attack speed, that is admittedly a little more valuable now because sources of attack speed elsewhere are gone, and attack speed is, in a way, sort of just another more multiplier. Also, attack speed is kind of a double-edged sword because of how they've changed mana, but we'll get to that in a little while. For right now, I do want to bring up the Rage passive masteries. They're all right. It's hard for me to evaluate the value of them at face. Nearby enemies are intimidated. Obviously, that's kind of a classic. If you don't have a source of intimidate, this is probably worth it. And because Rage is such an easily acquirable stat now, definitely go for that, I would say. The movement speed might be nice as well. Speaking of melee, tinctures added to the core game. I was surprised by this, like incredibly surprised by this. The way they work, I can't say it's my favorite, but I'm glad they showed up, and I like the idea that they are melee only, and it's kind of a it's almost like a different Berserk, you know? It's like you have another kind of Berserk because what they do, unless you're the new Raider Ascendancy, which is there's so much to talk about, and I'm trying to abbreviate it. The new Raider Ascendancy basically lets your tinctures affect ranged weapons, because tinctures now only affect melee weapons. And what they do is, you activate them, and they burn your mana. Yeah, they slowly ramp up the mana burn on you, removing your resource to use abilities. It's like Delve, when you're in the darkness, right? It ramps up, goes more and more. Same with Berserk, when you're losing rage faster and faster. The mana burn thing is what I kind of don't like about it. I understand it because they've made the effects very potent. I think one of the ones they showed in the live stream was like 100% increased elemental damage, which is pretty good, I have to admit. And I do kind of like the masteries they've put up next to it. It definitely fits the ranger side of the tree. And it's a pretty decent suite of effects, especially the first 6 stacks of mana burn apply to you have no effect. That means you turn on your tincture and it works really well for a little while without you feeling it at all. And the way they work is they have a cooldown, I believe, of 8 seconds. So if you only need it for a short while, you can almost never really feel it, which I think is pretty cool. And then also you can get an automatic deactivation. And I think this is more so for the Warden because they have, what is it, like an up to 6 second linger that this will exactly stop you at. And then you'll only have 2 seconds of downtime. And I think as long as you're not dropping your mana too low, Wardens can basically have like almost an automated uptime where you just have to tap it every once in a while. I do wonder if Tinctures will have an automatic activation function, kind of the way Flasks can. I hope they've done that. Otherwise, I mean, it's one button, right? It should be fine. It's not like Flask Piano. And then there's retaliation skills. Retaliation skills are kind of billed as the old counterattack skills, which are gone, on steroids. You have to block. When you block, you unlock a use of them, and they do huge damn damage, apparently. I think they were talking specifically about Sword Rain? Sword Storm. There we go. Sword Storm. Cool. Sword Storm's a cool name. It's supposedly very good, like, single target damage. And I kind of understand the idea here because blocking against bosses is good and very potent. But like blocking against bosses with the old counterattack skills felt terrible. This looks like it could be pretty potent, especially like in mapping. It sounds like you could almost get away with just running around using retaliation skills constantly. Maybe you like have a cyclone when you're bossing, and then when these pop up, you give them hell, you know? I'm not entirely sure how it's going to work or if it's going to be good, right? We have to see the numbers and we don't have the exact numbers, but they're saying they're competitive, and I think I trust them on this because they're conditional. And this kind of comes alongside a Gladiator Ascendancy rework that we'll get to in a bit. Endgame improvements were pretty impactful. They like when they say improvements, they mean it. Sentinels are back. Recombinators explicitly are not, although in the League mechanic, there is now a thing with Isla where she is basically offering recombination. Apparently it's nerfed slightly, but Recombinators nerfed slightly is still probably one of the strongest crafting tools we've ever had, period. Nameless Seer can now just show up in your map, and if you don't want the item from him, you can swap what div cards will drop in your maps. That's a cool idea. I love that, honestly. That's freaking amazing. I should mention you can get a 6 map slot to the map device, and I thought this was really smart. I kind of hate that you still have to do a tier 17 map to get one of the slots, but that's fine. I mean, you get one of them from doing a Maven's invitation now for like just the Atlas, which means you can get to 5. And honestly, a lot of strategies with Scarabs come alive when you have that 4th extra slot alongside your map. I don't know how important the extra slot is going to be. I'm hoping it's just kind of superfluous, like a little bit of extra juice. It's hard to say, but apparently they also nerfed the T17 maps themselves. So maybe it's all fine, right? It could be. If the T17 maps are sufficiently nerfed, then this really isn't an issue at all anymore because they were definitely rather overtuned. In addition to Sentinel coming back, the Wildwood is back. There's no King of the Mist or anything. It doesn't have the NPCs, but you still get the Wisps and just like the encounters in the Wildwood, which is very nice, honestly. That's a good thing to invest in when you find it in a map. It can really boost your loot potential. And with things like item quantity going away on gear for players, that's a really big deal how this stuff is kind of coming into the game now. Because before, how do I put this? Me being someone who didn't run a quant, like, kind of juicing type Pathfinder, why did I say Pathfinder? Juicing type character that would, just kind of try to maximize drops. I didn't do that. Most people don't do that. When you don't do that and other people are doing it, it devalues your time, which is a kind of a gross way to look at it. I hate to say that because obviously we're just all here to have fun, but it does mean that the efficiency of how much money you're taking in is severely reduced compared to those people. So when they close that gap a little bit this way, I'd say it's generally a good thing because people who are super juicing are already so far ahead. When you add in like a quant color, it goes bananas. And I think it's a good idea that they did this. I'm sure the people who actually did it are probably upset. Hopefully they're not. Hopefully they're like, yeah, okay, it doesn't matter because, like they're all still on even footing and they know they're still going to be ahead of everyone else. Like Empyrean Gaming is still going to have way more money than I have in the first week of the league for like my next 10 leagues combined. Like, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal for those people, but it's going to be a big deal for the rest of us who kind of have just a little bit more buying power in the market. The Reflective Mist from Kalandra League is also back, and you can get an itemized version for gambling on your rings and amulets. Very nice. I'm very happy about that. And an audience with the King fragment from Ritual can now be found that lets you fight the Nameless King. No, that which was taken is not back. But there's a new item, new old item, that's basically the Brandis Pact that he drops that is back. Which is good, because honestly that was the more balanced, less bullshit version of the item, if I'm being perfectly honest. It was much more fair. That which was taken had the like ability to be completely busted. And I loved it. I loved it to death. But no, fine. You know what? This is amazing. We have another boss in the game who drops a very desirable item, and I think that's a massive win. I'll add real quickly, there is a tremendous amount of new scarabs in the game. A lot of scarabs that were in the game have been reworked. I think generally they've targeted some of the biggest juicing strategies and like div card scarabs, which will still have value, but not as much as before. And back to basics has been removed. And this is another one of those things where if you weren't abusing, that's a toxic way to talk about it, right? If you weren't using these strategies, your buying power is increasing. It's a good thing for most of the player base, because quite frankly, if you don't like playing the game that way, your pockets get, or your time is being abused a little bit, honestly. And that's not on the people who are playing the game that way. That's mostly on the developers. So I'm glad they changed it. Oh, and I don't like the changes they made to Blight, but the fact that double anointed amulets can now drop in Blight Ravaged maps is really interesting to me. If you can do this content, you probably have ridiculously massive money-making potential. Getting the right base with the right 2 anointments is going to be like finding a high-quality synthesized base, because it's going to do something that you just cannot get somewhere else. You can only have a double anointed amulet drop. It's going to be crazy. Although I do have to admit, I'm not sure how this works with applying a new anointment, because they have new oils that apply new things. I mean, I'm sure those could drop potentially. I don't know. It's all new and mysterious at this point. But I think this was a great idea to improve the loot rewards from these, because Blight Ravage maps were kind of all or nothing on like the big unique amulet drop Strangle Grasp. And this kind of adds that to the base game in a really tangible way that everyone could potentially access. The League improvements, I think, are generally very, very good. Delirium, the Simulacrum's much shorter now, but the rewards haven't really been reduced. I'd say your money per hour is probably going way up overall, because the waves that they removed were the early ones that didn't do that much. Ritual got a ridiculous buff, I feel like. The Penitent Mask is incredible. Like, 4 to maximum chaos resistance is nuts. We all know why. There's I don't remember what the name of the Val Timeless Jewel is, but that's crazy good. Sinistral Gloves, I feel, might be competitive for trappers. I don't know the most about traps, but I know this is like a rather competitive number. I don't know exactly how important it is for them to have Eldritch Implicits, which is what you will lose, but that seems pretty good to me. And then possibly the most interesting and like at the same time kind of vexing one is the Archdemon Crown. +2 to level of socketed skill gems is really good for like a minion build. Even though it kind of nerfs your support gems, they scale so well with levels, that's definitely going to be better. The downside is that they've removed one of the best universal applicators for exposure. And that was like how I understood this item. And now that that's gone, I'm a little sad. This makes me a little sad. You can usually get exposure somewhere else on a build, but this was very nice, and it applied all 3 types instantly. And now that that's gone, I don't know. I feel like there were a lot of builds that needed this universal application. But I don't know. Maybe I've missed something. Maybe there's like a tincture that'll do it now. I hope so, because that was kind of a unique effect that doesn't exist anymore. I think one of the other places you could get that actually was Raider, and Raider is now Warden, who I believe doesn't have that, which is kind of nuts. Also, you can get the, like the Wildwood corpse bases from Ritual, which is tremendous for Spectre enjoyers. I'm very happy for all of you, even though as a detonate person, I got a little clapped. But you know what? I'm still happy for you. I think that Spectres have been in a pretty hit or miss spot these last few leagues. Like there's like things that bring them way up and then things that bring them down. And this is one of the way ups that I wished had stuck around, and I'm glad it's sticking around. That's really good for the build. There are a few skill gem changes outside of kind of a bulk thing I want to talk about that I think are really important to bring up. And the very first line here, I think, is the most important one. Divine Blessing is gone unless you're using March of the Legion. This was really surprising to me. But I'll be honest, I I don't think I disagree with it. Maybe that's blasphemy. I feel like Divine Blessing was one of those things that was kind of like oppressive to work into your build and almost mandatory in ways. And I really like that it's gone. There's a lot of cool interactions that you could use it for, though, that I'm also like sad are gone. But I mean, March of the Legion is still there. If you really need it, if it was important to your build, you can still fit it, I hope, unless you had to use other boots, in which case that really sucks. We've all had builds get destroyed that way, so I hope it hasn't happened to you, but I think this is actually a very good change. Divine Blessing is really powerful in a way where I feel like it could spread to other builds, and over time, having access to an extra aura that way could become mandatory for like too many archetypes in a long enough series of time. Now, I do have to say, I feel like the buffs you get from Warcries have had a major disservice done to them. I don't like the change. I also don't like the change to Call to Arms, which they changed it. Yeah, it's auto exertion now. It's now a mana reservation, but you can use it on multiple Warcries, but they can't grant buffs or charges. And I hate that. I hate that so much. Like, one of the big things about Call to Arms was that it kept you with the ability to automate Enduring Cry from the left click changes last league. So this feels kind of like a rug pull by GGG, and I'm kind of saying, I'm calling them on it. I don't want to like curse and, I don't know, taint the video with that, but like I want to use some naughty bad boy words towards them, like on a personal level over this, because that's kind of that's a jerk move, dude. I hate that, and I know that they buffed endurance charges. We'll get to that in a moment. Now, don't do that. I hate having to push too many buttons. I designed my builds around not having to push that many buttons, and now I have to push more buttons, and it requires my character to stop and stand still. What is wrong with you, sadists? I should say, while I'm talking about Warcries, that I do like the change to Seismic Cry. This is one that I think is a big winner. The buff granting you % more armor is pretty great, actually. The buff doesn't last very long, but if you can get it lasting long enough, this is very good, and it's 50% more area of effect. That's awesome. It doesn't have like a increasing reduction mechanic in it. It's just 50% more all the time. It's more armor. Stun threshold is, I mean, kind of nice, to be honest. Stun immunity hasn't felt that mandatory anymore, so actually it's probably really nice. And I think this is kind of a big winner as far as attack exertion is concerned. This was one that fell off, and now I think it's right back in it in like a very major way, especially for what is it, Earth Shatter? I don't know exactly how the AoE numbers shake out on that, but I'm pretty sure the overlap just became very consistent on that. So that's probably a very good skill now. Some other things to keep in mind, Determination and Grace did both catch a slight nerf, which is being offset by the addition of new base types that are going to give you more base armor and evasion. Overall, they're very sincere, at least in the way they say it, that we're going to have more armor / evasion just in general, assuming you're actually getting it from the equipment. If you were just running the aura, it's worse. The Determination one is probably the bigger deal at this point, because if you were playing an evasion build, Determination was kind of a way to get some physical reduction without going the phys damage taken as route, and now that route is like gone. They didn't like block it off with a road sign. They like strapped dynamite to it and blew it to smithereens, man. That's a tough situation. Evasion builds are probably going to have some new woes to overcome in the next patch, but they were also in a very strong place before that, so I think they are going to figure it out. There's always Iron Reflexes as like a crutch if things get really bad, and I'm sure they'll adapt just fine. I don't think there's going to be any reason not to play that kind of a build. But it does bear mentioning that the physical situation is going to be like the challenge for people on the right side of the tree, which is why I think Lightning Coil is going to be a very desirable body armor choice. Now, let's get into the broad sweeping changes here, because there's a lot of text here that honestly is repeated verbatim across all the skills. What I want to talk about first are spells. Most of them, or a lot of them, have had like a slight damage buff. I don't think I've seen any direct nerfs. I think the only spells that actually got direct nerfs were like the detonate spells, by virtue of how the corpses have been toned down a bit. But the actual flat value is still good, which is another thing to keep in mind, that these skills still do great spell damage and are probably great choices in general. Using Armageddon Brand as a guinea pig, You'll notice here, though, the effectiveness of added damage values is no longer a static value. And what this does is it kind of maintains parity with the damage value of the gem, like the number you're getting for the spell, so that when you get added damage, it matches proportionally based on the cast speed. That's a lot of text. That's a lot of words that doesn't mean a lot. The part here that matters, like really, really matters, has nothing to do with what's here. It's what's implied here. And this effective damage, this damage effectiveness change isn't going to mean much while leveling, because generally while leveling, you don't have giant damage concern. You know what is going to matter? When you push your gem to level, I don't know, 26, 27, and probably this number goes up. I think there's a higher cap on spells in general for the addedness of effective damage, which is a pretty big change in my opinion. I think that's actually a pretty significant bonus to a lot of skills out there. And I think more or less every spell is getting that. I'm not entirely sure because they don't list every spell. But that's what I seem to be getting as an idea from this. Maybe that's not going to happen. Maybe it's just going to stop, and these were spells that they thought were overperforming in the campaign process, and this was just a way for them to tap it a little bit. But I don't know. Feels a little strange. I almost feel like these patch notes are supposed to be longer. That's irrelevant, though. The real important thing is to look at the damage values on melee skills. I will mention first, ranged skills kind of have this as well, but not nearly to the severity. Here's Double Strike. Double Strike used to be 91% at level 1. Now it's 143%. That's like 50% more damage. But it used to go up to 140% at level 20. So level 1 is already better than level 20. At level 20, it now goes to 409%. That's like, that's a lot, dude. That's like, it's almost triple, which I have to say, it needed it. Like, it actually needed this, by the way. It needed to be this much more. I know that sounds absurd, especially to people who probably haven't touched melee in a while, but melee was in that bad a spot compared to other skills in this game. The values kind of vary based on the skill and its popularity beforehand, but generally the worst skills, and I think Double Strike was a special offender, really got kicked. That's Fungella bragging about killing someone in Eve, I'm sure. And yeah, but melee in general, regardless of any other change, it's going to be doing a lot more damage. At least twice as much, I think, generally across the board. Dual Strike of Ambidexterity, that might be doing less than double, but it's still going to be doing more. And that skill, I mean, that skill went crazy. So, very exciting time for melee skills, especially, which is like part of the reason I don't want to revisit my own build. I want to play melee this league. I want to play melee real bad. I mean, look at Glacial Hammer, 622%. It's a comical value. I feel like maybe they should have just kept the numbers here the same and then buffed all the values on the weapons, but then you'd have too much separation while leveling. So I kind of understand why they did it this way. This is definitely a buff. And it's actually such a huge separation from what it used to be. I almost wonder if melee gem levels are going to have enough value, because this increase across 20 levels is huge. Then again, I should talk about the downside, because melee skills have more of a mana cost than they. That's kind of an important note, especially when you have tinctures. There is a new keystone that will make tinctures work towards your life instead, which means you have to turn them off at some point, or the stacks could kill you, because you're basically dealing with Delve Darkness literally at that point. And that's fine, right? Fixing mana for melee builds is going to be a thing you have to worry about now. But, and this is one of those things where I'm kind of glad that they've removed some sources of attack speed that were super mandatory or awkward, like from Rage, or I want to say some Ascendancy notables. Anyways, mana efficiency is going to be a little easier because we're not going as fast, and because the attack timing isn't as wonky. Having multi-strike on a skill, your first hit is going to come out much faster. It's going to hit much harder. It's probably going to kill everything in front of you while you're leveling and into endgame. And that's why it's going to feel good. That's why this is going to be really strong. And then your single target's going to be a lot better as well. But like, especially in clear, I think melee is going to be kind of monstrous. Which it should be, because it comes at the cost of having to take more damage than any other playstyle in the game. No, that's just how it is. And it kind of comes with that design philosophy change where you have to be the one doing the damage, which is another thing. You can't hide behind a totem unless you have that one unique. You can't hide behind your ballistas. You got to get in there and you got to smack them. I like that. I like that a lot. There's a few last things I want to go over, things that were buffed, things that were nerfed. The Adorned Unique Jewel has been deleted from the... No, it hasn't been deleted from the game. But it's definitely not going to be the oppressive force that it used to be, especially considering it can roll 0%, which is hysterical. I'm sure 100% is still valuable. 150% was like... It was oppressive. If you could get 150% Adorned, you were going for that. Ultimately, at some point, your min-max would take you there. A lot of endgame unique items that gave very, very potent methods of like fixing your build strength-wise have had slight nerfs. Eternal Damnation, removing the ability to gain endurance and power charges was kind of interesting, but with the endurance charge buffs, which I still have to talk about, that kind of makes sense because the elemental damage reduction. I'm not sure where power charges comes into the equation, but I mean, fair enough. I have felt for a while now that some of these unique items took up too much design space in fixing your character's survivability in a way where they couldn't really give us survivability elsewhere, because if you tacked it onto these items, I mean, people were already borderline immortal. Dancing Dervish is now a free source of Rampage for anyone, because you can weapon swap after it activates, and you just have Rampage. That's pretty cool, because I believe the minion is basically immortal. Perfidy, I'm bringing up, even though I don't like to go to these smaller things. I'm trying to really cut down how much I talk about, because this is going to be a long video no matter what. Having a placed banner does not prevent you gaining Valor is actually very interesting. I'm pretty sure that means you can have 100% banner uptime with this item. And at least with War Banner, wow. That's pretty significant for damage. I think that might actually be like tremendously massive, and I don't want to over/underestimate, but Perfidy might see a lot of use as just like a way to add damage to your build because of the way banners have been changed. I feel like if you want to go into banners and heavy invest, Perfidy is your choice. It's going to get you there, and you're probably gonna slap the shit out of some people, if I'm being honest. That's so nuts that you can just gain all your Valor back, probably before it even ends, and just get back into it. I need to remember not to pass this up, because I think this might be one of the most important changes of the entire patch. Endurance charges have been changed. They no longer grant elemental resistances, they just grant flat additional elemental damage reduction, which will stack multiplicatively with your resistance. This is a big deal. If it's not obvious, if you have 6 endurance charges, that's 24% elemental damage reduction. So you have, I don't know, that's a lot. If you have, I don't know, 85% resistance to fire, and then you have this on top of it, that 24% is worth so much. And in fact, the effect of this is more impactful the less additional maximum res you have. But when you combine the two, you can really shrink the number of elemental damage you're taking by a tremendous amount. This is a big deal. This is spell suppression on the left side of the tree, in a way. Finding a way to work in endurance charges to your build is now so much more valuable, especially in a single target situation where you're never going to hit some charge removing mob that kind of invalidates this defensive layer. But against bosses, this is the ticket to immortality in a big way, unless they're dealing chaos damage, I guess. Now, one of the biggest changes that I think is a buff to players is how they've changed the way essences affect monsters. They no longer give increased life, they give toughness, which, I mean, it adds some rarity and quant, which is nice, but it's basically a less damage multiplier. And the reason this is important is because when you had enough essences in a mob, that increasing value could quickly get out of control, and you'd end up with something that was tanky beyond belief. But they explain here that the toughness works in a different way. 100% increased toughness is 50% less damage. That's scary until you realize that a monster with 200% increased toughness, 67% less damage. It only goes up by 17% on that second 100%, which means that when you're fighting essences with essence monsters with huge amounts of essences on them, it's not going to feel nearly as oppressive as it did in the past. That's going to be something much more doable by most builds. If your build was already good at fighting those Giga Essence mobs, you're gonna love this because they're gonna die instantly for you now. And then they add this line of text here: reduced toughness causes monsters to take more damage. I think they're hinting that there's going to be toughness reduction somewhere in the game, maybe on a new unique, because this line of text is kind of out of nowhere. That's my theory, at least. Additionally, a lot of other monsters generally had nerfs applied to them as well. Some modifiers that basically kind of hurt armor users were toned down or even removed. I want to say, the Simulacrum modifier no longer has any overwhelm attached to it. It's just physical damage reduction. This is just the crush debuff now, which is important because something overwhelming physical damage reduction and then you also getting crushed was really scary. Now it's just crush, which is very manageable. And possibly the most important nerf to monsters is that freezing big bosses has a really noticeable effect. 30% reduced action speed was already good. 50%, they're literally half as fast as baseline. That's good. That's really good. I think you could also potentially do this if you had enough chill effect. I'm not sure on the numbers, but this is really good. This is a major buff to your survivability if you invest in that kind of defensive layer. And lastly, we end off with our boy Kirak. I guess I could also mention the changes to the bandit quest rewards. One of the points from Iramir has been moved to a different quest, and now the rewards have kind of been streamlined, and Iramir only gives 1 point. This is a big deal because helping Oak grants 40 max life. The actual life mastery for 50 life has been nerfed to 30. I haven't gotten to that yet because it's kind of a small note. So, I mean, this is pretty competitive. 8% movement speed, sure. From a min-max perspective, if you were leveling fast and you had all the respec currency in the world, this is pretty great. And 15 all res, very comfy. You know, respec it later if you don't need it anymore. But 15% all res for 1 skill point is actually very competitive, especially in builds that struggle with this. And there are builds that struggle with this far into mapping, to be honest. And then, yeah, you get the 1 point from Aramir, which is good. You get the 1 point elsewhere. I want to say this is a big win. I think most people agreed it was a big win. It's already been announced, though. The thing I want to talk about at the end here is Kirak. I think the new essence change is good. It's just more essences for the chaos you invest. It's the same ratio, but I think this is really nice for your time investment because now you don't feel quite as pressured to like go into your map, hit the essences, and then leave immediately. Now you've got a little more time to run around, and that's probably for the best because that playstyle, I'm sure some people loved it, and they're actually like really pissed off about this. But honestly, I want to do my map, man. Abyss is cheaper. I love that because I love Abyss. Ambush is cheaper, but also has less strong boxes. I think technically you're saving a little bit of money here. Harbinger, again, cheaper, but less Harbingers. Actually, not even again. This one actually kind of maths out to just you're going to see less Harbingers in each map. And I don't know if they needed to do this because there was obviously that Acropolis mod that made this crazy, but this is fine, right? It was okay to have 3. Maybe it was a little too strong with Scarabs and Atlas investment, and that's why they did it. Because, yeah, those Scarabs are fun, and I don't think those Scarabs got removed. And then Breach just got straight up buffed to have 3 breaches, which I think is extra fantastic because I also like Breach. I'm an old man. I like the older leagues. Anyway, I'm really excited for the league. There are a lot of changes I didn't go over yet that I kind of don't love. I'll be honest. Things that were tweaked or nerfed in a way that kind of made me unhappy. And you know what? I did forget to mention. Basically, all staves, scepters, claws, daggers, and wands had their base critical strike chance buffed. I'm glad I noticed that as I was going through my closing statements here, because that's a pretty big change, and a lot of wands had attack speed buff. So I do see those kinds of builds getting a major bump. But yeah, they've made a lot of changes that seem a little strange to me. I do feel like Unearth was unfairly overtapped, like no one actually looked at the numbers on Corpse Life when they did that. The good news is, it was easy to get Unearth to level 86 corpses, and then you wouldn't need any more investment. Now you can get that investment, and it'll actually matter. I don't know if you can still get to 86 corpses, but if you could, honestly, that would shrink the change of that nerf to nothing. Like, if you can get to 86, you haven't lost anything. But it is going to be more expensive to get there, and I understand that. It should probably take a little bit more investment for what the build was able to do, because it was kind of a premium mapper on a pretty big budget early on in the league. A lot of skills also had their added like attack damages that were built in removed. I think Lightning Arrow could even be you could even say it was nerfed a little bit because of that. It has better damage effectiveness now, but the actual built-in added lightning damage, which was a big number, is gone. And it almost seems like every skill has had that done to it. Even trauma was nerfed in that regard, the trauma support, which was really interesting to me because they're basically saying, well, there's less of it and you have more base damage, so this is more valuable. And they're correct. That's actually very true. These numbers went down, but they might actually be more valuable in kind of a paradoxical way because the damage effectiveness has gone up so much and you don't get added damage as much as you used to. Oh, I'm so glad I noticed this before I went on. I honestly, support gem balance I passed over and I shouldn't have, so I'm glad I'm here even though this is supposed to be something else. Increased duration is now a more modifier, which is fantastic. Inspiration is now a less modifier, which is smart. It was a little jank that you could get to 100% reduced. You should still have to have a little bit of mana. But in a lot of cases, this is going to be, I would even say technically better, right? At a certain point, reduced overtakes it because you actually just kind of reduce it to next to nothing or nothing. Less is going to have more of a stronger multiplicative value with less investment. So that's good. Infused channeling is now amazing. It's got one of the best lines of defensive text I've ever seen in the game, and I'm actually so glad it does. They removed physical tag from a lot of skills, so I was wondering if this was coming. But yeah, you just take 8% less damage from hits now while you're channeling on everything, which is great because I hated how Charge Dash didn't have a physical tag. I thought that was a huge oversight. You don't get infusion anymore, but they did buff the actual damage from the baseline. So it does a little bit less damage, but it gives a lot more survivability. And I think that's overall probably a pretty major buff. Oh, and Reaper Enjoyers Rejoice. Chance to bleed works on minions now. Has a bigger value. Yeah. All right, well, I kind of flew off the rails there and became a scatterbrained idiot at the end, but that's the way it is. It's a huge, huge patch. I think actually the biggest one we've ever had, if you go by words. And it wasn't all ruthless changes this time. I'm very happy with it, but there are some changes that have me concerned. Champion was nerfed. I didn't talk about that. Champion has lost a lot of armor, and some of the built-in fortification now only goes to 15. I actually hate that change. I hate that change a lot. They cannot be nerfing melee staples and their defensive layers. But maybe they're still buffed overall, and I'm kind of overreacting because they've definitely added more tree love for your defenses and just a champion with endurance charges now probably going to be a lot stronger than a champion with endurance charges in 3.2.4. All right, 3.24. Yeah, I'll just say the best thing about these changes across the entire patch notes is that I don't know what's going to happen. For the first time in a long time, I'm looking at this and I'm like, man, I have no idea what it's going to be like when we log in. But I have a feeling overall builds are going to be stronger. Spellcasters not so much, but they were already pretty good. And a lot of spells did get numerical buffs, which I'm happy about. Not huge ones, but small ones to maybe bring them up, especially the underutilized ones. Melee, at the very least, should definitely be having a good time. I'm going to be shocked if they're not. If they're not having a good time, wow. How bad is melee is the question. But they fixed a lot of things that were systemic, especially that melee animation thing. And if that doesn't get you excited, you don't know what was wrong. I guess I have to say. I think overall, the very, very top end of melee probably hasn't changed much. But everything that was down here off camera, I'm literally touching the floor, is probably up here now. Potential wise. And that's the most exciting thing, right? There's a whole part of the game that really hasn't been viable to explore and use unless you were using, I don't know, some sort of a stacking metric to prop it up. And now it's very usable. Yeah. If there's anything I've missed in the patch notes, there's a distinct possibility it was spoilered and it's been information that's out there for a week or two already, and that's why I hopped over it. Hopefully that doesn't upset anyone too much. I have to go cry in a corner as I try to figure out how best to test and get an idea of where the Catavis Corpse Blasting build is going to be at. Hopefully I have that build out in a couple days for anyone who wants to run it back or anyone who hasn't played it. It will still be a really strong league starter because it will be durable and it will clear maps really efficiently on a budget. That has not changed. I promise you. In fact, I believe it's gotten stronger defensive-wise. At the very least, it's got one extra maximal all res that it didn't have before because that just got thrown onto a node that we already take. And I think there's more maximum all res in more places on the tree in the Templar area, which I didn't talk about in the patch notes. There's for sure one between the Templar and the Marauder. So prospects are good. Anyway, I have to get going. I have to edit this, and I'm looking at the recording and seeing it's an hour long and like, wow, that went way longer than I thought it would. Anyway, have a good one, Exiles. And I'll see you on League Launch.